Joining me now is a member of the House Judiciary Committee, Maryland Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin. So getting Bill Barr in front of your committee to talk about that letter, what more are you going to find out that we didn't learn today in this new letter?
Well, let's see. The Attorney General Barr writes letters kind of like Agatha Christie novels. There are more and more mysteries built into each one. In this one, he says that the president has the opportunity to exercise executive privilege over some parts of it, but the president has deferred to him instead, so he's not going to pre-clear the report with the president. But does that mean that Attorney General Barr is going to be excising parts of the report, asserting the executive privilege for the president? Again, it's somewhat inscrutable but disturbing what the Attorney General has written here. But look, the bottom line,
the AG can do that will make you trust him? Because
yeah, definitely. He can turn over the Mueller report. Wouldn't you think that would make the whole country trust him?
What about any redactions that it might need?
Well, first of all, Congress is perfectly capable of making the redactions ourselves. In the past, if you've looked at the precedents, if you looked at Watergate, for example, and Mr. Jaworski, or you looked at the Kenneth Starr investigation into Bill Clinton, they just turned the complete report over, unexpurgated, unedited, and then they sent over boxes of supporting evidence, and that's all we're asking for.
Is using the Ken Starr report, though, the best example? Because everyone argued at the time that maybe this was, or a lot of people did, this was too much information to release to Congress because it got out to the public immediately. There is arguably sensitive material in this report, grand jury testimony that is supposed to be secret. The Intel Committee maybe could argue there are sources and methods here. Is there nothing that you think might have there might be a reason to go through with Bill Barr or the special counsel?
I have no idea. I haven't seen it. Well, I have no idea because I haven't seen it. But look, I mean, that's a sweet argument to be making now about the Clintons, that there was all of this incredibly salacious and damaging material to third parties that was in there. But it was turned over to Congress, and it was up to Congress to make the decisions. And we're just asking for the exact same treatment that every other independent counsel and special counsel has accorded to Congress. And it's our right. We are the lawmaking branch of government. We have a constitutional oversight duty. We want the report. The Attorney General's got to stop playing games with this.
The material infringing on the privacy or reputation of third parties, what does that mean to you?
That's a great question. I don't know where that doctrine came from. It looks like the stork brought it today because it didn't appear in the last letter. And then all of a sudden, maybe he's deciding, oh, well, wait a second, this could be incredibly damaging to who? I don't know. Other members of the president's family, the president's staff, friends of the Attorney General, who knows? But that is not a doctrine that appears in any other treatment of a report by an independent counsel or a special counsel. So they're just making up doctrines as they go along. And this is one of our fears in continuing to wait. The April 2nd deadline, which Chairman Nadler imposed on the Attorney General, was, as far as I can tell, the most permissive deadline that any Department of Justice has ever gotten in terms of turning over one of these reports. So there was ample time to do it. Now the Attorney General comes back and won't even specify a date, but says sometime in mid-April we'll be getting it. It's just unacceptable. And what it
so
leaves the impression,
any day after April 2nd is going to be a day too late?
Well, yeah, I mean, he could have done it again as Kenneth Starr had done it, as Jaworski had done it, at the first possible moment. You get in the vans, you put the boxes in, and you send everything over. It's not that complicated. We're the Congress of the United States, and we have safes where we can keep all of the national security material safe. In fact, the transcripts of the Watergate grand jury tapes are still in our safes. They've been there for decades, and they've been totally safe and fine.
Will you trust the conclusions of this report if there are any redactions whatsoever within it?
Well, I mean, of course, if there are reasonable redactions, of course, I would accept that.
What do you define as a reasonable redaction? Because a minute ago, you seemed to suggest that any redaction would not be reasonable.
Well, if there's a compelling national security reason to do it, and again, Congress is perfectly capable of doing that. And if there
so you need to see it, even if there are redactions for the public, that's one thing. But you in the House Judiciary Committee needs to see the entire report without any redactions.
Yes, indeed. We are the lawmaking branch of the government. We represent the people. That's the whole purpose of having a special counsel. Remember, this has been confused by the fact that the Attorney General has interjected himself in the process. But in the past, the special counsels, the independent counsels, have just turned the material over to Congress, saying, here are the factual the findings and here are the factual conclusions. You decide what to do with it. Then the Attorney General, in this case, has decided to say, well, the special counsel can't determine whether or not there's obstruction of justice. He says there's a substantial body of evidence arguing for obstruction of justice, but he can't conclude that. And again, that's ambiguous because we don't know exactly what the special counsel said. But in any event, that's sort of the secondhand reading we get. And then the Attorney General just declared there was no obstruction of justice. Now, as best as we can understand, and this is the thing we'd like to ask him, that's based on the 19-page single-spaced memorandum that William Barr wrote before he became Attorney General. In that memo, what he said was that the president cannot, as a matter of law, be guilty of obstructing justice when he tells members of his administration to drop a case, to leave out a criminal suspect, to end an investigation because he is the president. So now understand that's a radical fringe view within the law today under this so-called unitary executive theory that the president controls the entire law enforcement function and can basically decide who gets prosecuted and who doesn't get prosecuted. Is that the basis upon which the Attorney General is saying there was no obstruction of justice? We just don't know. So that would be the very first question I think that the Judiciary Committee would be asking him.
What are the second and third questions?
Gee, I haven't thought through those because that one is so overwhelming. I mean, put it this way, if he says, well, no, I was able to set aside my view, which is a very emphatic view that the president can never be prosecuted for obstruction of justice, and instead I decided that the quantum of evidence that was adduced by the special counsel wasn't sufficient to prosecute. How did he make that decision overnight when apparently special counsel Mueller couldn't make it after 2 years of investigating and knowing the case inside out? We just don't know.
If you think there's evidence in there that means the president did obstruct justice, if that's the conclusion, if that is the conclusion that you end up making, or Democrats make in the House, what is the remedy here? Because Nancy Pelosi has seemingly already taken impeachment off the table.
First of all, I think that's a misstatement of what Speaker Pelosi said. What she said was
she said as long as she said no. She said there's a bipartisan bar. It's a really high bar. Do you think
are you saying the Republicans would never impeach this president, even if the special counsel said there were high crimes and misdemeanors committed?
I don't know if the special counsel said that.
Well, neither do I. We don't know what the special counsel said, but you seem to be accepting that the Republican Party would never question this president. Maybe you're right. Maybe
Party. I mean, I don't know, but the Republican Party has so far shown that they've been very unwilling to go after this president. So,
well, let me tell you what Nancy Pelosi said.
For precedent here, and Nancy Pelosi having the bar as high as it is, with everything we've seen publicly, I'm just curious what the Democrats' solution going forward would be.
Well, let's just take it one step at a time. Speaker Pelosi said that there would need to be overwhelming evidence and there would need to be bipartisan support. Now, back when Richard Nixon committed crimes against the United States, the Republicans who'd been sticking with him all of the time said that they had seen enough when there was direct obstruction of justice. And they went to the president and they said, after the Watergate tapes were revealed, Mr. President, this has got to end. This is over. So she wasn't saying we're taking it off the table. She just said there's an extremely high bar given the conduct of the Republicans up to this point. And I agree with that. And I think every Democrat agrees with that. But impeachment is part of the Constitution. It's not a fetish with anybody, nor should it be a taboo. It's the people's defense against a president who's acting like a king. Now, we would never impeach somebody for the reasons the Republicans did. They impeached Bill Clinton for telling one lie about a private act about sex. And that is a terrible standard that we would never use. We're looking for high crimes and misdemeanors, offenses against the Republic. We've sworn a constitutional oath to defend the Constitution, and obviously we'll do that.
So you're saying that there could be evidence yet that could convince Republicans that he is not fit for office. We will see, though, what happens. Yes or no on this? Because I'm out of curiosity for me. If he's found to be in violation of the emoluments clause of the Constitution, do you think that's a high crime and misdemeanor? Just yes or no, because we're out of time.
Well, he needs to get the consent of Congress before he accepts emoluments, and if he refuses to return emoluments to either where they came from or to the U.S. Treasury, that would be a very serious crime against the United States. The founders based the Constitution on the idea that the president had to have undivided fiduciary loyalty to the people of the country and could not be taking money from foreign princes and kings and foreign governments.
Congressman Jamie Raskin. Congressman, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.